All right, so this is the last chunk of chapter 5 that we're going to do on the online lecture portion. So, section 5.4 is pretty minimal. It's all about anticipation. And anticipation in genomic terms is really the stronger or the earlier expression of a trait will actually occur depending on what generation it's in. So, one of the classic examples that we see anticipation happen is in myotonic dystrophy, and so this syndrome is a muscle disorder, and it's actually determined by an autosome, and the allele on the autosome is going to be end up being dominant. So, what anticipation means is that individuals with myotonic dystrophy can pass this trait from generation to generation. But as the generations progress, the symptoms are going to get much stronger and usually start showing up earlier in life with each generation. So, this syndrome is caused by an unstable region of DNA that can either increase or decrease in size as the gene is passed from generation to generation. So, we still don't have a really good understanding of what exactly is going on there, but essentially, DNA is not being replicated. Relative to the exact copy of the gene. So it's either increasing or decreasing in size, and polymerase 3 or polymerase 1 is not able to go back in and fix it during replication. So, what we see with myotonic dystrophy is that the age of onset and how severe the disease is are very much correlated with the size of the unstable region. So, the bigger the region, the earlier the onset. So some other diseases that have anticipation associated with it is like Graves' disease, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, Huntington's disease, Fragile X syndrome, which we've talked about before, Kennedy disease, and then of course myotonic dystrophy. All right, the last section of chapter 5 really focuses on genotypic expression and how that interacts with different environmental effects. So this should kind of be familiar to you as we work through it. So we know that the environment can actually play a big part on production, especially in agriculture. So if we think about um, yields, in colder climates tend to be um, much smaller than yields in warmer climates. And this all has to do with gene expression. So in this example, a genotype can have several different phenotypes depending on the environment. So if we have the same plant here, and that plant has a homozygous dominant big G genotype, but it's raised at different temperatures at 20 degrees, 50 degrees, or 70 degrees, we can actually see that total yield of this plant is going to increase based on the temperature. So genotype doesn't have to be anything to do with it. It's actually an environmental effect in the ability of that temperature to facilitate the most efficient growth. We also see this in some of our animal species. So in rabbits, the Himalayan rabbit breed, we can actually see two different phenotypes just depending on what temperature these bunnies were actually reared at. So if the temperature was 20 degrees Celsius or less, then those rabbits tend to be solid white but have black points. And if those rabbits are reared at temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius, which is pretty warm, then they tend to be, or they will be solid white. So Himalayan rabbits can be one of two major phenotypes, just depending on the temperature at which they were raised. We also see this in flies. In the spring, you'll see lots of deformed flies running around because If the temperature is pretty cold, then we get flies with very, very small wings. And if the temperature is pretty warm, like during the summer, then we get a lot more consistent wing size in the flies. So the wing size is directly correlated to the temperature of the environment. All right, so really quickly, I want to talk about continuous versus discontinuous traits and how those characteristics are inherited. So let's keep in mind that a discontinuous characteristic is a trait that just has a few easily distinguishable phenotypes. The opposite of that is a continuous trait, and these traits are going to display a in continuum. So this could be like height or weight or growth rates. Um, Anything with a trait that can be continuously recorded. So continuous characteristics also tend to be called quantitative characteristics. And these quantitative traits usually are determined, or the phenotype for these quantitative traits are determined by a number of loci. So this becomes important, especially as we're trying to um, find plants and animals that are more, drought tolerant or energy efficient. Because depending on what trait we're actually looking at, um, there's a number of possible genotypes that can be involved because there's a number of genes that inform one trait. So the way to figure out how many phenotypes is determined by the number of loci is by taking 3 to the nth power. So we know that the possible genotypes associated with a loci are going to be 3. So homozygous dominant, heterozygous, homozygous recessive. And so if there's 8 different uh, genes that are involved in one trait, then there's 6,561 different genotypes that actually can exist. So many of these differences in the phenotypes will be very, very slight, and it's hard to actually tell a difference. So when we think about continuous traits, I want you guys to think about polygenic traits. So polygeny really means many traits, or more specifically, many genes play a role in determining the phenotype's trait. So this is not the same as pleiotropic, and a pleiotropic characteristic or pleiotropy is where one gene controls many traits. And an example of that is the PKU gene, where if we get the genotype of little p, then those individuals tend to be mentally retarded, have blue eyes, and light skin color. So 3 very different phenotypes that are controlled by one gene. So polygenic characteristics versus pleiotropic characteristics when it comes to continuous traits. Make sure you have a good handle on those definitions as well. All right, and so for those of you guys that are interested, on the end of this slide, I'm not going to go through it because it gets pretty intense. There is kind of a horse coat color 101 set of slides for you.